There is a version of you that has never made the decisions you've made. It has never taken the roads you took, never spoken the words you chose, never built the life you are living right now. It exists in a state that is the precise mirror image of everything you have become, and according to some of the most rigorous, peer-reviewed, mathematically verified physics ever produced by the human mind, it is not a metaphor. It is not a spiritual concept dressed in scientific language. It is a structural feature of reality that quantum mechanics has been pointing toward for nearly a century, and that ancient wisdom traditions mapped with startling accuracy thousands of years before the first particle accelerator was ever built. Your parallel self is real. And the reason your nervous system is already responding to that statement, the reason something in your body just shifted, just leaned forward, just sent a signal you didn't consciously authorize, is because your nervous system already knows this. It has always known this, not because of belief, not because of wishful thinking, but because your nervous system is itself a quantum instrument, and quantum instruments don't lie about the structure of the field they're embedded in. Today, we are going to lift the veil on something that has been hiding in plain sight inside the physics you were taught in school, inside the ancient texts that most people dismiss as mythology, and inside the biological architecture of your own body. We are going to go layer by layer, deeper than most people ever go, until we reach the place where the concept of a parallel self stops being a fascinating idea and becomes something you can feel with absolute clarity in the center of your chest. And somewhere in the middle of that journey, you are going to encounter something the thumbnail calls your anti-self. Not because it's your enemy, but because what it represents, what it actually is at the quantum level, is the most confronting and the most liberating thing you may have ever looked at directly. Let's begin at the surface, because the surface is where almost everyone stops. And the surface, as you're about to discover, is the thinnest possible layer of what's actually here. When most people hear the phrase parallel self or parallel universe, they do one of two things. They think of science fiction, the multiverse of comic books and blockbuster films where alternate versions of you made different choices and lived different lives. Or they think of New Age spirituality, the idea that somewhere out there, a better version of you is living the life you wish you had. Both of these responses are surface reactions. They're what the mind does when it encounters a concept that is too large for the frame it's been given, so it shrinks the concept down to fit what it already knows. But here's what's beneath that surface reaction. The concept of parallel selves isn't science fiction. It isn't wishful thinking. It is the direct mathematical consequence of the most successful scientific theory ever developed by human beings. Quantum mechanics, the theory that underlies all of chemistry, all of electronics, all of the technology you are using right now to watch this video, makes predictions about the nature of reality that are accurate to more decimal places than any other theory in the history of science. And one of those predictions, one that follows inevitably from the mathematics itself, is that reality is not singular. It is not one fixed line of events unfolding in one direction. It is a structure of branching, coexisting possibilities that are all, in some sense, equally real. That is not a fringe position. That is not a conspiracy theory or a spiritual bypass. That is what the mathematics says. And the reason most people never encounter this layer of the physics is because the surface version of quantum mechanics, the version that gets taught in introductory courses, the version that gets simplified for public consumption, stops before it reaches the part that changes everything about how you understand who you are. So, let's go beneath that surface now. In 1957, a physicist named Hugh Everett III submitted a doctoral thesis at Princeton University that should have reorganized the entire foundation of how humanity understands reality. His thesis was called The Relative State Formulation of Quantum Mechanics, and what it proposed was this: that the wave function, the mathematical object that describes all the possible states a quantum system can be in, never actually collapses. It never stops being what it is. It never chooses one outcome and discards the others. Instead, every possible outcome of every quantum event continues to exist, branching into separate but equally real versions of reality. This became known as the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And while it has been controversial in the philosophical sense, in the sense that it asks us to accept something almost incomprehensibly large about the nature of existence, it has never been mathematically disproved. In fact, in recent decades, it has gained significant traction among theoretical physicists, precisely because it requires the fewest additional assumptions. It takes the mathematics of quantum mechanics at face value and follows it wherever it leads. And where it leads is here. Every quantum event that has ever occurred has generated a branching of reality. Every decision point, every moment of uncertainty, every instance where the universe could have gone one way or another, it went both ways. All ways. Every way that was possible. And you, reading or listening to this right now, are one branch, one thread in an incomprehensibly vast tapestry of coexisting realities, each one containing a version of you that is the product of a different sequence of quantum events. But there's a layer beneath that, because the many worlds interpretation isn't just about large-scale decisions like whether you took this job or that one, whether you moved to this city or stayed in that one. It operates at the quantum level, which means it operates at the level of every single subatomic event in your body and brain, every firing neuron, every photon that strikes your retina, every chemical reaction in your cells. All of it is quantum mechanical at its foundation. All of it is subject to the branching structure that Everett's mathematics describes. Which means the divergence between you and your parallel selves isn't just about the big moments. It is constant. It is happening right now, at a level below the threshold of your conscious awareness, in the quantum substrate of the very neurons that are processing these words. You are branching from parallel versions of yourself at every moment, not metaphorically, structurally, mathematically. Feel what shifts when you sit with that. Now let's go to the next layer, because the physics is only one face of this. And if you stop at the physics, you miss the part that the ancient ones already knew. Long before Hugh Everett sat down with his mathematics at Princeton, long before the word quantum had ever been spoken, human beings who were paying very close attention to the nature of consciousness and reality were mapping something that corresponds, with remarkable precision, to what the physics eventually found. They were using different language, different metaphors, different frameworks, but they were pointing at the same hidden layer. In the Hindu philosophical tradition, there is a concept called the Akasha. It is often translated as ether or space, but this translation is insufficient. The Akasha is not simply empty space. It is the field that contains all possibilities simultaneously. The ancient Vedic texts describe it as the substrate of existence itself, the medium in which all realities are embedded, the ground from which all forms arise and to which they return. The Akasha does not choose between possibilities, it holds them all. It holds. Every version of every event exists within it simultaneously, and what we experience as physical reality is one thread drawn through that infinite field. This is not a metaphor for the many worlds interpretation. This is a description of the same structure, arrived at through direct investigation of consciousness, rather than through mathematical physics. In the Kabbalistic tradition, there is the concept of parallel worlds within the structure of the Ein Sof, the infinite, the limitless, the ground of all being from which the 10 Sephirot, the 10 aspects of divine emanation, flow. The Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, written in the 13th century but drawing on much older oral traditions, describes a reality in which every soul exists in multiple states simultaneously, and what we experience as our singular life is one expression of a being that has depth and breadth beyond what ordinary consciousness can perceive. In the Taoist tradition, the concept of the 10,000 things points towards something similar. The Tao itself is the undivided, undifferentiated field of all possibility. The 10,000 things are the manifested expressions of that field, and crucially, they do not exhaust the field. Every manifested thing coexists with its unmanifested counterpart. Every expressed possibility coexists with all the possibilities that were not expressed in this particular thread of experience. The Buddhist concept of Indra's net describes a cosmos in which every point contains a reflection of every other point, a structure of infinite mutual reflection in which no single perspective is complete in itself, because every perspective is always also the reflection of every other perspective. This is not just poetic language, it is a description of a holographic, non-local structure of reality that quantum physics has been independently approaching from the other direction for 100 years. What I want you to notice is this. These traditions were not guessing. They were not speculating. They were reporting. They were the results of direct investigation, of minds that had been trained through practices of extraordinary depth and rigor to perceive layers of reality that ordinary consciousness doesn't reach. And what they found, independently, across cultures and centuries, was a layered reality in which what we experience as our singular self is one expression of a being that exists simultaneously across multiple states. They found your parallel self long before physics did. If this is landing for you, if something in you is recognizing what we're uncovering here, take a second to like this video and subscribe so you don't lose the thread. We go this deep in everything we make, and you'll want to be here for what comes next. But there's a layer beneath that, because here's what neither the physics textbooks nor the ancient texts tend to emphasize clearly enough. This isn't just about what's happening out there in the structure of the cosmos. This is about what's happening in here, in your body, in your nervous system, in the biological architecture that you carry around with you every moment of every day. Your nervous system is not a passive receiver of reality. It is an active participant in the construction of reality. And it is built, at its deepest level, on quantum mechanical processes that make it not just a biological organ, but a quantum instrument. One that is, at some level, always in contact with the field of all possibilities that the ancient traditions called the Akasha, and that modern physics calls the quantum field. Let's look at this more carefully, because this is where the veil lifts in a way that makes everything personal. The human nervous system contains approximately 100 billion neurons. Each neuron is connected to thousands of others, forming a network of staggering complexity. But the complexity isn't the point. The point is what's happening at the level of the individual neuron, and more specifically, at the level of the synaptic junctions where neurons communicate with each other. At the synapse, the transmission of a signal from one neuron to another is not a deterministic mechanical process. It is a quantum mechanical process. The release of neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers that carry signals across the synaptic gap, is governed by quantum tunneling and quantum coherence effects. This has been demonstrated in peer-reviewed neuroscience research. The synapse is not a simple on-off switch. It is a quantum event generator. And quantum events, as we've already established, are not singular. They branch. What this means is that the computation happening in your nervous system right now, the process by which you are perceiving, thinking, feeling, deciding, is not a singular deterministic process. It is a quantum mechanical process happening in a field of branching possibilities. Every thought you have, every feeling that arises, every decision that forms, these are not the inevitable outputs of a mechanical brain. They are the expressed outcomes of quantum processes that simultaneously generate unexpressed outcomes in parallel branches of reality. Your nervous system is not just running one program, it is running all the programs simultaneously, and what you experience as your conscious stream of awareness is one thread being drawn through that simultaneous computation. But here's what the research on the nervous system reveals that goes even deeper than the quantum mechanics. Your nervous system doesn't just process the present moment. It is constantly generating predictions about what comes next. Neuroscientists call this predictive processing. Your brain is not a passive recorder of what's happening. It is an active prediction machine, constantly generating models of what reality is likely to look like, and then comparing incoming sensory data against those models. What you experience as perception is not the raw data of the world. It is your nervous system's best prediction, updated moment by sensory input. And here's the hidden layer within that. Your nervous system is not just predicting one future. It is generating predictions across a distribution of possibilities, a probability distribution, exactly like the quantum wave function. Your nervous system is, in its predictive architecture, built in the image of the quantum field it is embedded in. It generates a spread of possible realities and then collapses that spread into a single experienced moment. Just like the quantum wave function, just like the observer effect in quantum mechanics, you are not just living in a quantum universe. You are a quantum instrument living in a quantum universe, built to interface with the structure of branching realities at every level of your biology. And your nervous system already knows about your parallel self, not as an abstract concept, as a felt reality. Because your nervous system is always, at some level, in contact with the quantum field from which all the parallel branches emerge. Every time you have a strong intuition about a path not yet taken, every time you feel a sudden sense of a different version of your life that could exist, every time you experience that uncanny feeling that you've been here before, or that something is about to happen, or that there's a version of this situation that you can almost see but can't quite reach, that is your quantum nervous system registering the adjacent branches of reality. This was always there. You just hadn't looked deep enough yet. Now let's go to the layer that the thumbnail is pointing at, because this is the one that stops most people cold. This is the one that the ancient traditions considered the most important and the most dangerous to approach without preparation. And it is the one that, once you see it clearly, becomes the most liberating thing you have ever encountered. Your anti-self. The word anti is doing something specific here. It's not saying enemy. It's not saying shadow in the psychological sense, though there are connections we'll explore. It's pointing at something more precise. In physics, every particle has an antiparticle. The electron has the positron. The proton has the antiproton. The antiparticle has the same mass as its corresponding particle but opposite charge, opposite spin, opposite quantum numbers. When a particle and its antiparticle meet, they annihilate each other and release pure energy. This is not a metaphor. This is the structure of matter itself. The universe is built on the principle of particles and their precise opposites. And the question that physicists have been wrestling with since the discovery of antimatter is this: why is there more matter than antimatter? Why does our observable universe consist almost entirely of matter, when the physics suggests that equal amounts of both should have been created in the Big Bang? The answer, as far as physics can currently tell, is that there was a very slight asymmetry in the initial conditions, a tiny imbalance that meant matter won out over antimatter by just enough to produce the universe we inhabit. But the antimatter didn't disappear. It annihilated with matter, yes, but the energy released by that annihilation is part of the fabric of the universe we live in. The anti-version of matter is encoded in the energy of our reality. It is present in the structure of what exists, even though it is not visible as matter. Now bring that structure into the domain of the self. Your anti-self, in the framework we're building here, is not your enemy. It is not the version of you that makes bad decisions or lives a worse life. It is the precise quantum complement of who you are. It is the version of you that exists in the branches of reality where every quantum event that shaped you went the other way, where every choice that formed you was made differently, where every wound that defined you was not received, and every gift that defines you was not given. It is not a better or worse version of you. It is the complementary version, the one whose existence, in a sense, defines yours by contrast. And here's where this gets genuinely confronting. If quantum mechanics is correct, if the many worlds interpretation accurately describes the structure of reality, then your anti-self is not hypothetical. It is actual. It exists in a branch of reality that diverged from yours at some point in the quantum history of your personal existence. And the energy of that divergence, the quantum equivalent of the particle-antiparticle annihilation, is not lost. It is present in the field. It is encoded in the quantum substrate of the reality you inhabit, which means that your anti-self is not somewhere else, separated from you by an impassable barrier. It is present as a pattern in the field you are embedded in, and your nervous system, being the quantum instrument that it is, can register that pattern, not as a vision or a hallucination, as a felt sense, as a quality of energy that you have encountered in your life, perhaps without knowing what it was. Have you ever met someone who seemed to be the exact opposite of you in some deep way? Not just different, but precisely, almost unnervingly complementary. Have you ever encountered a situation that felt like the mirror image of something in your own life? As if reality was showing you the other side of something you'd only ever seen from one angle? Have you ever had the experience of feeling pulled toward a completely different version of your own life? Not a fantasy, not escapism, but a felt sense of a real alternative that seemed to be pressing against the membrane of your current reality. These are not random experiences. These are your nervous system registering the presence of adjacent branches. The quantum field doesn't hide its branching structure from you. Your biology is built to perceive it. What has been missing is the framework to understand what you're perceiving. What hidden layer have you recently discovered beneath the surface of your own reality? A truth that was hiding in plain sight, a pattern that dissolved the moment you looked directly at it, a version of yourself you could always sense but never quite name. Drop it in the comments. Your recognition is exactly what someone else needs to see. But there's a layer beneath that. Let me show you something. There is a story I want to tell you. Not an ancient parable this time, but something closer. Something that will let you feel this in your body before we go any deeper. Imagine a woman named Mara. She is 34 years old, and she has built a life that, from the outside, looks exactly like what she was supposed to want. The career she chose at 22 because it was practical. The relationship she stayed in because leaving felt too uncertain. The city she lives in because it was where the career took her. Every morning she wakes up in this life and feels, beneath the surface of her competence and her routine, a faint but persistent signal, like a radio frequency just below the audible range, like a vibration in the walls of a house that you can feel in your feet but can't hear with your ears. She has tried to explain this signal to herself in many ways over the years. She has called it restlessness. She has called it ingratitude. She has called it anxiety. She has called it the grass being greener. But none of these explanations quite fit, because the signal doesn't feel like dissatisfaction. It doesn't feel like something is wrong. It feels like something is present. Like there is something in the room that she keeps almost seeing out of the corner of her eye. One afternoon, Mara is sitting in a coffee shop, and a woman walks in who stops her cold. Not because the woman is remarkable in any obvious way, but because of the quality of her presence. The way she moves through the space as if she belongs to it completely. The way she sits down and immediately seems to fill the room with a quality of ease that Mara has never felt in her own body. The way she laughs at something the barista says, and the laugh seems to come from somewhere deep and unhesitating. Mara watches this woman for a few minutes, and then she realizes something that makes her set down her coffee cup. The woman is not doing anything extraordinary. She is just being. But the way she is being is so precisely the opposite of the way Mara has been being for the last 12 years, that it lands like a key turning in a lock that Mara didn't know she had. This is not envy. This is not comparison. This is recognition. Mara's nervous system is not telling her that she wants to be that woman. It is telling her that the woman is showing her something about herself, a layer of herself that has been present all along beneath the surface of the practical career and the uncertain relationship and the city she ended up in rather than chose. The signal she has been feeling for years is not dissatisfaction with her life. It is contact with her anti-self, with the version of her that exists in the branch of reality where the quantum events went differently, where the 22-year-old Mara made a different choice, not a better or worse choice, a complementary one. And the energy of that complementary version of her life has been pressing against the membrane of her current reality, not to taunt her, not to mock her, but to show her something, to reveal a layer of herself that her current life has not yet expressed. What Mara does with that recognition is the beginning of a different story. But the recognition itself, that moment of contact with the complementary version of her own existence, is the quantum event that changes everything. Not because she abandons her life and becomes someone else, but because she stops treating the signal as noise and starts treating it as information. And you have felt this signal. You know exactly what it is. You've just been given a new name for it, a more accurate name, one that doesn't dismiss it as restlessness or anxiety or ingratitude, one that honors it for what it actually is, your nervous system in contact with the quantum field of your own parallel existence. Now let's go to the next layer. Because we've established what the parallel self is, and we've established what the anti-self is, and we've established that your nervous system already knows about both. But there's something even deeper here, something that the ancient traditions and the quantum physics both point toward, and that changes the meaning of everything we've covered so far. The question is not just whether parallel selves exist. The question is what they are for. In the many worlds, interpretation of quantum mechanics, the branching of reality is not purposeful. It is mechanical. It happens because the mathematics says it happens, not because there is any intention or direction built into it. The parallel branches simply exist, diverging from each other at every quantum event, with no communication between them, no relationship between them, no meaning in the divergence beyond the mathematics of wave function evolution. But here's the layer beneath that. The many worlds interpretation is the most mathematically minimal interpretation of quantum mechanics. But it is not the only one that takes the mathematics seriously. And some of the most interesting work in quantum foundations in recent decades has been exploring the question of whether the branches are truly isolated from each other, or whether there is some form of influence, some form of information transfer, some form of quantum coherence that persists across branches in ways that the standard formulation doesn't capture. This is not fringe physics. This is the cutting edge of quantum foundations research. And what it's pointing toward is the possibility that the branches of reality are not hermetically sealed from each other, that the quantum field that underlies all branches is a shared substrate, that what happens in one branch can, under certain conditions, influence what happens in another, not through any violation of quantum mechanics, but through the very quantum coherence effects that make quantum computing possible, that make photosynthesis in plants more efficient than classical physics could explain, and that make the human brain capable of the kind of non-local, pattern-recognizing, future-anticipating cognition that neuroscience is still trying to fully account for. In other words, the wall between you and your parallel self may not be a wall at all. It may be a membrane, and membranes, by definition, are permeable. The ancient traditions knew this, and they developed practices specifically designed to work with this permeability. Not to cross over into parallel realities. That's the science fiction version of this. But to draw information, energy, and possibility from the field of parallel existence into the present reality. To allow the quantum field of all possible versions of yourself to inform and enrich the version of yourself that is currently expressed. In the Vedic tradition, this was understood through the practice of sankalpa, a form of intention setting that goes much deeper than what the word intention typically conveys in modern usage. A sankalpa is not a wish or a goal, it is a resonance. It is the practice of aligning your present nervous system with the frequency of a version of yourself that already exists in the field of all possibilities, drawing that version into greater expression in your current reality by creating the conditions of quantum coherence between your present state and the state you are calling forward. This is not manifestation in the pop psychology sense. This is a sophisticated understanding of how a quantum instrument, the human nervous system, can work with the structure of a quantum field to shift which branch of possibility becomes the expressed reality. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there are practices that work with what are called the bardos, the intermediate states between different conditions of existence. The bardos are not just about death and rebirth. They are about the spaces between states of consciousness, the quantum intervals between one expressed reality and the next, where the field of all possibilities is maximally open and the influence of awareness on which possibility becomes expressed is at its greatest. In the Sufi tradition, the concept of the barzakh, the isthmus or barrier between two things that also connects them, describes exactly the membrane we've been talking about. The barzakh is not a wall, It is the place where two realities touch, where what is expressed and what is unexpressed are closest to each other, where the influence of one on the other is most available to a consciousness that knows how to work with it. All of these traditions were mapping the same hidden layer, the permeable membrane between the expressed version of yourself and the field of all your parallel possibilities. And they were all developing practices to work with that membrane consciously, intentionally, and with extraordinary precision. The fact that quantum physics is now providing a mathematical framework that corresponds to what these traditions mapped thousands of years ago is not a coincidence. It is what happens when rigorous investigation of reality from two completely different directions reaches the same hidden layer. But there's a layer beneath that. Let's go to the place where this becomes fully embodied. Because everything we've covered so far has been in some sense conceptual. It has been the map. And the map, no matter how accurate, is not the territory. The territory is what you can feel in your body. The territory is what shifts in your nervous system when you stop reading the map and start walking the ground. I want to take you through a practice now, not an exercise, not a visualization in the superficial sense, a genuine shift in the way your nervous system is orienting to reality. A perception shift that uses what we've established about the quantum structure of your existence to open a channel of awareness that most people keep closed without knowing it's there. Find a comfortable position. You don't need to close your eyes, but you can if it helps you go deeper. Take a breath that goes all the way down to the base of your lungs, and as you exhale, let your body release the surface tension it has been holding. The tension of managing the presentation of yourself. The tension of monitoring how you're being perceived. The tension of maintaining the narrative of who you are and what your life is. Just for a moment, let the surface relax. Now, without trying to think your way into this, I want you to bring your awareness to a quality of yourself that you know is present, but that doesn't fully show up in your current life. Not a fantasy, not something you wish you were. Something that you know is real in you, that you've glimpsed in moments, that you've felt in flashes, that other people have sometimes seen in you, even when you couldn't see it in yourself. A quality of being that exists in you, but hasn't been fully expressed in the version of your life you're currently living. Don't analyze it. Don't explain it. Just let it be present as a felt sense, a quality of energy in your body. Notice where it lives. Notice what it feels like when you stop trying to manage it and just let it be there. This is not imagination. This is your nervous system registering the presence of an adjacent branch of your own existence. The version of you in which this quality is more fully expressed is not a hypothetical. It is a real branch of the quantum field of your being, and the felt sense you just experienced is the quantum coherence between your present state and that adjacent state. The membrane between you and that version of yourself is thinner than you think. Now take another breath, and this time, as you exhale, I want you to notice something about the quality of your awareness right now. Notice that you are not just the content of your thoughts and feelings. You are the awareness that is observing those thoughts and feelings. You are the space in which the quantum events of your nervous system are happening. You are not the branch. You are the awareness that is present in all the branches simultaneously. This is the deepest layer. This is what the ancient traditions were pointing at when they talked about the Atman in Hindu philosophy, the Rigpa in Tibetan Buddhism, the Ein Sof in Kabbalah, the Tao in Taoism. Not the individual self, but the awareness that underlies and pervades all the individual selves across all the branches. The quantum field itself, in its aspect as pure awareness, the observer that is not localized in any single branch, but is present as the ground of all branches. When you touch this layer, when your awareness recognizes itself as this, the question of which parallel self is the real one dissolves. Because from this layer, all the parallel selves are expressions of the same awareness playing out across different branches of possibility. Your anti-self is not your opposite. It is another expression of the same awareness you are. The divergence between you and your parallel selves is real at the level of expressed reality. But at the level of the quantum field, at the level of the awareness that underlies all expression, there is no divergence. There is only the field, endlessly exploring its own possibilities through the infinite branching of experience. Feel what shifts when you let that land. You are not one branch trying to become a different branch. You are the awareness that contains all the branches. And from that awareness, you have access to the full field of what you are, not just the expressed version, but the entire quantum landscape of your own existence. This was always there. You just hadn't looked deep enough yet. But there's still another layer, and this one is the one that makes everything practical. Because what we've been building toward is not just a beautiful understanding of reality, it's a functional shift in how you relate to your own life, and that shift has specific, concrete implications for how you move through the world. Let's talk about what the research on the nervous system tells us about what happens when a person becomes aware of their parallel possibilities in this way. Because there is neuroscience here that is not speculative, that is not new age, that is peer-reviewed and reproducible, and that maps onto what we've been describing with remarkable precision. When the human nervous system is in a state of high threat, high stress, high uncertainty, what neuroscientists call the activated state, its predictive processing narrows dramatically. The range of futures it generates models for contracts. It focuses on the most probable negative outcomes and allocates its resources to managing those outcomes. This is adaptive in genuine survival situations. But in the context of ordinary modern life, where the threats are rarely the kind that require immediate physical response, this narrowing of predictive possibility has a devastating effect on human creativity, decision-making, and what we might call quantum coherence. Because when your nervous system is locked in a narrow band of predicted futures, it is not in contact with the full quantum field of your possibilities. It is running on a reduced subset of its own potential, shaped by threat-based conditioning rather than by the actual structure of the field it's embedded in. Conversely, when the nervous system is in what researchers call a coherent state, a state of calm alertness, of open awareness, of what the HeartMath Institute has documented as heart-brain coherence, its predictive range expands dramatically. It becomes capable of registering subtle signals from the environment that the activated nervous system filters out. It becomes capable of generating creative solutions that the threat-focused nervous system cannot access. It becomes capable of what we might call quantum sensitivity, the ability to register the adjacent possibilities in the field and draw them into expressed reality. This is not mysticism, this is documented neuroscience. And it maps perfectly onto what the ancient traditions were describing with their practices of meditation, contemplation, breathwork, and the cultivation of what the Vedic tradition calls prajna, the direct perception of reality that goes beneath the surface of conditioned thought. The practices that the ancient traditions developed were, in modern neuroscientific terms, practices for moving the nervous system from the activated narrowband state into the coherent wideband state, from the state where only the most probable futures are visible to the state where the full quantum field of possibility is accessible, from the state where your parallel self is just a concept to the state where it is a felt reality that your nervous system can use as information. And here's what that means practically. When your nervous system is in coherent contact with the quantum field of your parallel possibilities, you don't need to know which parallel self to become. You don't need to plan your way into a different branch of reality. You simply need to stay in contact with the full field of what you are, and allow the quantum coherence between your present state and your adjacent possibilities to draw the expressed version of your life in the direction of greater fullness. This is what the Vedic concept of Sankalpa is actually doing. This is what the Tibetan practice of working with the bardos is actually doing. This is what the Sufi understanding of the barzakh is actually pointing toward. Not a willful forcing of reality into a different shape, but a coherent alignment of your nervous system with the full quantum field of your being, which allows the expressed version of your life to naturally evolve toward the expression of more of what you actually are. The anti-self, understood from this layer, is not something to be feared or fought. It is the quantum complement that defines the full field of your being. The particle needs the antiparticle to define what it is. You need the anti-self to understand the full scope of your own quantum nature, not to become the anti-self, not to merge with it, but to allow the awareness of its existence to expand your sense of what is possible for you, to let the full field of your parallel existence inform the expressed version of your life with a richness and depth that a singular, unaware existence cannot access. Is there a moment you've had recently where you sensed something beneath the surface of your life, something you always knew was there but couldn't reach until now? A pattern that dissolved the moment you finally looked at it directly? Share it in the comments. The layers you've uncovered are part of the collective map we're building here together. Let's go to the next layer now, because there's something about the specific warning in the thumbnail, the word warning, that deserves to be addressed directly, because there is a genuine warning here, not a dramatic one, not a fear-based one, but a real one that the ancient traditions took very seriously and that the neuroscience supports in ways you might not expect. The warning is this: becoming aware of your parallel self and your anti-self is not a neutral experience, It is a destabilizing one. And the destabilization, handled without awareness, can lead to a specific kind of suffering that is very common in people who have begun to sense the quantum depth of their own existence, but haven't yet developed the framework to work with it consciously. The suffering looks like this. You become aware that there are other versions of your life that are possible. You become aware that the choices you've made have closed off branches that are still present in the field. You become aware of the gap between who you currently are and who you sense you could be. And without the framework to understand what this awareness is and what it's for, it becomes a source of grief, regret, paralysis, and a painful sense of being trapped in a life that is somehow less than what you should be living. This is not a sign that something has gone wrong. This is a sign that your awareness has expanded to the point where it is registering the quantum field of your parallel possibilities. But your nervous system hasn't yet learned to work with that field consciously. The awareness has arrived before the practice, and the result is a kind of quantum vertigo. A dizziness from suddenly being able to see the depth that was always there, but that you never looked at before. The ancient traditions were very clear about this. They built their practices in a specific sequence precisely because they understood that opening awareness to the depth of reality without the grounding to work with it consciously was a recipe for suffering rather than liberation. The warning in the thumbnail is pointing at this real phenomenon. The anti-self is not dangerous in itself, but the encounter with the full quantum field of your parallel existence, without the grounding that allows you to work with it rather than be overwhelmed by it, can produce exactly the kind of disorientation that looks, from the outside, like a crisis. The grounding is what we've been building throughout this transmission. The understanding of what the quantum field is, the understanding of what your nervous system is and how it interfaces with that field, the understanding of what the ancient traditions were pointing at with their practices, the understanding that the awareness of your parallel self is not a problem to be solved, but a capacity to be developed. That the anti-self is not a threat, but a complement. That the quantum depth of your existence is not a source of vertigo, but a source of richness. Once you have the framework to stand in it without falling. The warning is not, be afraid of your parallel self. The warning is, be ready, be grounded. Have the framework before you go to the depth, which is exactly what this transmission has been building. Now let's go to the deepest layer, the one that everything else has been preparing you for. Here it is. The reason your nervous system already knows about your parallel self is not just because your nervous system is a quantum instrument embedded in a quantum field. It is because at the deepest level of your being, beneath the quantum mechanics, beneath the ancient wisdom, beneath the neuroscience, beneath every layer we've peeled back, you are not separate from the field. You are the field. Locally expressed, temporarily individuated, but not fundamentally separate. The quantum field that generates all the parallel branches is not something you are inside of. It is something you are an expression of. The awareness that is present in all the branches simultaneously is not something you have access to. It is what you are. The veil between you and your parallel self is not a barrier between two separate things. It is the membrane between two expressions of one thing. This is what the ancient traditions were pointing at with their highest teachings. Not just that reality is layered, and not just that deeper layers are more powerful than surface layers, but that at the deepest layer, there is no separation. The Vedantic concept of Advaita, non-duality, is not a philosophical position. It is the direct perception of the deepest layer of reality, that the apparent multiplicity of selves, of branches, of parallel possibilities, is the play of one awareness exploring its own infinite nature. The physicist David Bohm, one of the most important quantum theorists of the 20th century, developed a framework he called the implicate order and the explicate order.
The explicate order is what we see, the surface reality of distinct objects, separate selves, linear time, and singular causation. The implicate order is what's beneath it, the enfolded, undivided, non-local quantum field from which the explicate order unfolds moment by moment. Bohm's framework is not mysticism, it is rigorous mathematical physics, and what it describes is precisely the structure that the ancient traditions were pointing at, a surface reality of apparent separation unfolding from a depth reality of fundamental unity. Your parallel self is real, your anti-self is real, the quantum branching of reality is real, and all of it, every branch, every parallel expression, every version of you that has ever existed or will ever exist in the infinite field of quantum possibility, is the expression of one awareness that has never been divided, never been separated, never been anything other than what it always already is. This is the deepest layer, and from here, the surface looks completely different. From this layer, your current life is not a limited version of something that could be better. It is one expression of an awareness that is simultaneously expressing itself across infinite possibilities. Every choice you've made has not closed off the other choices. It has expressed one branch of a being whose nature includes all the branches. Every version of you that exists in the parallel field is not a better or worse version of you. It is another facet of the same jewel. The grief of the unexpressed life, the grief that comes from sensing all the parallel possibilities you haven't lived, doesn't disappear from this layer, but it changes quality. It becomes something more like awe. The awe of a being that is vast enough to contain infinite versions of itself. The awe of an awareness that is so rich, so inexhaustible, so fundamentally creative, that it generates an infinite field of parallel expression just by being what it is. You are not a limited self trying to access a larger field. You are the field, temporarily wearing the experience of limitation in order to know itself through the specificity of one expressed life. And the moment your awareness recognizes this, the moment the veil between your expressed self and the field you are made of becomes transparent, the whole game changes. Not because your circumstances instantly change, not because the practical details of your life suddenly rearrange themselves, but because the relationship between you and your life changes fundamentally. Because you stop experiencing your life as something that is happening to a limited self, and start experiencing it as something that is being expressed by an unlimited awareness. And from that position, everything that your parallel self represents, every unexpressed quality, every unlived possibility, every complementary version of your existence, becomes available not as a fantasy of what you should have been, but as a resource for what you are becoming. This is where the ancient practices become not just interesting, but essential, because the recognition of this deepest layer is not stable on its own. The nervous system, conditioned by years of surface-level operation, will pull you back to the surface. The habits of thought, the patterns of perception, the grooves of self-concept that have been worn deep by repetition. These don't dissolve just because you've had a moment of recognition. The practice is what makes the recognition stable. The practice is what trains the nervous system to remain in contact with the depth, even while navigating the surface. This is why the ancient traditions invested so much in practice. Not because the recognition is difficult to achieve, but because the recognition is easy to lose. The veil reforms, the surface reasserts itself. The quantum field recedes back into the background of ordinary perception. And the practice is what keeps the membrane between the surface and the depth transparent. What keeps the awareness of the field alive in the midst of the activity of the expressed life? The practice doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't require a monastery or a teacher or years of formal training, though all of those things can be valuable. At its most essential, the practice is simply this: regular, deliberate contact with the depth. Regular, deliberate return to the awareness that underlies the surface. Regular, deliberate recognition of the quantum field of your parallel possibilities, not as a source of grief or comparison, but as the evidence of your own infinite nature. In practical terms, this might look like a few minutes each morning of the kind of awareness we touched on in the practice earlier in this transmission. Letting the surface tension release. Letting the awareness settle into the space beneath the content of thought. Touching the felt sense of the unexpressed qualities of yourself that exist in the parallel field. Not to chase them, not to mourn them, but to let them inform the expressed version of your life with their presence. It might look like a moment of pause before a significant decision, not to calculate the optimal outcome, but to feel into the full quantum field of your possibilities and notice which direction has the quality of coherence with your deepest nature. Not the safest direction, not the most socially acceptable direction. The direction that resonates with the full field of what you are. It might look like a regular practice of what the Tibetan tradition calls Rigpa recognition. The deliberate noticing of the awareness that is present before, during, and after every thought and feeling. The awareness that is not the content of experience, but the space in which experience arises. The awareness that is present in all the parallel branches simultaneously. The awareness that is not your individual self, but the quantum field of all selves, locally expressed as you. These are not complicated practices, but they are deep ones, and the depth they access is not somewhere else. It is here, it is now,
It is the layer beneath everything you have ever experienced, present in every moment, waiting for your awareness to look beneath the surface and find it. Now let me tell you about a man named Elias. Elias was a physicist, not a famous one. A working physicist at a mid-sized university, spending his days in the particular combination of tedium and occasional brilliance that characterizes most academic scientific careers. He had spent 20 years working on problems in quantum foundations, the deep, often thankless work of trying to understand what quantum mechanics actually means, not just how to calculate with it. He had published papers that were read by perhaps 300 people in the world. He had attended conferences where the same debates he'd been having at the beginning of his career were still unresolved at the end of it. One afternoon, Elias was sitting in his office reading a paper on quantum decoherence, the process by which quantum systems lose their quantum coherence through interaction with their environment and begin to behave classically. He was reading a particular passage about how the boundary between quantum behavior and classical behavior is not a sharp line, but a gradient. That quantum effects don't simply switch off at the macroscopic scale, but become progressively harder to detect as systems become larger and more complex. And something happened in Elias's mind that he would later describe as the sensation of a floor giving way beneath him. Not in a frightening sense, in the sense of suddenly discovering that what he had thought was solid ground was actually a surface stretched over something much deeper. He put down the paper and sat very still for a long time. Because what he had just realized was this: if quantum effects don't switch off at the macroscopic scale, then the human brain, the most complex macroscopic object known to science, is not exempt from quantum behavior. It is not a classical computer running on quantum hardware. It is a quantum system of extraordinary complexity, exhibiting quantum effects at every level of its operation, including the level at which consciousness arises. And if that is true, then the question of what consciousness is, the question that philosophy and neuroscience and physics had been circling around for centuries without resolution, might have an answer that none of those disciplines had been willing to fully accept. Consciousness might not be a product of the brain in the classical sense. It might be the quantum field itself, locally expressed through the complexity of the brain. The observer in quantum mechanics, the thing that collapses the wave function, the thing that selects one branch of reality from the infinite superposition of possibilities, might not be a passive recorder of events. It might be the field itself, knowing itself through the instrument of the biological brain. Elias sat with this for a long time, and then he did something that surprised him. He wept, not from sadness, from recognition, from the sudden, overwhelming sense that he had been studying for 20 years, a map of something that he was, that the quantum field he had been describing in equations was not an object of study, but the ground of his own existence, that the parallel branches he had been calculating were not abstract mathematical structures, but real expressions of the same awareness he was. He had been, for 20 years, an archaeologist who had been excavating the ruins of his own house without knowing it was his house. And the moment he recognized it, everything changed. Not his equations, not his papers, not the practical details of his academic life, but the relationship between him and his work, the relationship between him and the reality he was studying, the relationship between him and himself. Elias went on to write one paper that was different from all the others. Not technically different, not mathematically different, but different in the quality of its attention, different in the depth from which it was written. It was a paper about the quantum foundations of consciousness, and it was read by far more than 300 people. Not because it said something no one had ever said before, but because it was written from a place of direct recognition rather than theoretical speculation. Because the author had stopped studying the depth from the surface and had instead written from inside the depth itself. And you have been living at the surface of something with infinite depth. Today, you began to see beneath it. Now let's bring all the layers together. Because we've been on a long journey, and before we reach the final layer, I want to make sure we haven't lost any of the threads we've been weaving. We started at the surface, the popular understanding of parallel selves as science fiction or New Age speculation. We went beneath that to the actual physics, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, Hugh Everett's mathematics, the branching structure of reality that follows inevitably from taking the wave function seriously. We went beneath that to the neuroscience, the quantum mechanical processes in the brain and nervous system, the predictive processing architecture that mirrors the quantum field, the documented effects of nervous system coherence on the range of possibilities available to awareness. We went beneath that to the ancient wisdom traditions, the Vedic concept of the Akasha, the Kabbalistic structure of the Ein Sof, the Taoist understanding of the Tao and the 10,000 things, the Buddhist vision of Indra's net, the Sufi concept of the Barzakh, all of them mapping the same hidden layer, the permeable membrane between the expressed self and the field of all parallel possibilities. We encountered the anti-self, not as an enemy or a shadow, but as the quantum complement that defines the full field of your being, the precise opposite that makes you what you are by contrast, the pattern in the quantum field whose presence your nervous system can register as a felt sense of adjacent possibility. We went through the warning, the genuine destabilization that comes from becoming aware of the quantum depth of your existence without the grounding to work with it consciously, the quantum vertigo that the ancient traditions built their practices to prevent. We touched the deepest layer, the recognition that you are not separate from the quantum field, but an expression of it. That the awareness present in all the parallel branches is not something you have access to, but something you are. That the veil between your expressed self and the field of all your parallel possibilities is not a barrier between two separate things, but a membrane between two expressions of one thing. And we brought it into practice, the regular, deliberate contact with the depth that keeps the membrane transparent, the training of the nervous system to remain in coherent contact with the full quantum field of your being, even while navigating the surface of ordinary life. This is the complete map. But the map is not the territory. The territory is what you've been feeling throughout this transmission. The territory is the shift,
that has been happening in your nervous system as each layer was revealed. The territory is the recognition that has been building, layer by layer, toward the moment when it becomes impossible to look at yourself the same way again. That moment is now. You are not a singular self living a singular life in a singular reality. You are an awareness of infinite depth, locally expressed through one thread of quantum possibility, in contact with the full field of your parallel existence through the quantum architecture of your own nervous system. Your parallel self is not somewhere else. It is present in the field you are embedded in, pressing against the membrane of your current reality with the energy of its complementary existence. Your anti-self is not your enemy. It is your quantum complement, the precise opposite that defines the full scope of what you are. And your nervous system already knows all of this. It has always known. Every intuition, every felt sense of adjacent possibility, every moment of recognition that there is more beneath the surface. These were not illusions or wishful thinking. They were your quantum nervous system, accurately registering the structure of the field it is embedded in. The veil is not a barrier, it is a membrane, and it is thinner than you think. Now let's talk about what you do with this. Because knowledge without integration is just another surface, and everything we've uncovered today is only as valuable as the depth to which you allow it to change how you move through your life. The integration principle for this transmission is this: you are always already in contact with your parallel self. The question is not how to reach it. The question is whether you are paying attention to the contact that is already happening. Every strong intuition is contact. Every felt sense of an unexpressed quality in yourself is contact. Every moment of recognition when you encounter someone who embodies something you know is real in you is contact. Every time you feel the pull of a direction that doesn't fit the narrative of who you've decided you are, that is contact. Every time the signal comes, that below audible range vibration in the walls of your current life, that is contact. The practice is not to chase the parallel self. The practice is to receive the information that the contact is already providing. To let the quantum field of your parallel possibilities inform the expressed version of your life, not by abandoning what you've built, but by allowing it to be enriched by the full depth of what you are. This is the difference between quantum coherence and quantum collapse. A collapsed wave function has chosen one outcome and discarded the others. A coherent quantum system maintains contact with the full field of its possibilities and expresses through that contact a richness that no single collapsed state could contain. Your life can be a collapsed wave function, a single choice that has discarded all the others, or it can be a coherent quantum expression, one thread in the full field of your possibilities, informed by and in contact with all the others. The choice is not about what you do, it is about the quality of awareness you bring to what you do. The collapsed self does what it does without contact with the depth. The coherent self does what it does in full awareness of the quantum field it is embedded in, allowing the depth to inform the surface with a richness that transforms everything it touches. This is what the ancient traditions meant by living from the Tao, by operating from the Ein Sof, by the Vedic concept of Dharma,
not as a moral code, but as the expression of your deepest nature through the specific form of your expressed life. By the Buddhist concept of Buddha nature, not as a spiritual achievement, but as the recognition of what you already are beneath the surface of conditioned self-concept. You are already this. The depth is not something you need to achieve or earn or become worthy of. It is what you are. The practice is simply the regular, deliberate remembering of what you are. The regular, deliberate refusal to stop at the surface. The regular, deliberate return to the layer beneath everything. The awareness that is present in all the parallel branches simultaneously, locally expressed as you. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you can see through it. Before we close, I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with the question rather than rushing to answer it. In this transmission, we've been talking about your parallel self and your anti-self as if they are out there in the quantum field somewhere, separate from your current experience. But what if they're not? What if the qualities that define your parallel self, the unexpressed qualities, the unlived possibilities, the complementary expressions of your being, are not absent from your life but simply unacknowledged? What if the anti-self is not somewhere else in the quantum field, but present right now in the aspects of yourself that you've been refusing to look at? What if the veil between you and your parallel self is not a quantum barrier in the physics of reality, but a perceptual barrier in the architecture of your own awareness? What if the work of lifting the veil is not about accessing some external field, but about becoming willing to see the full depth of what is already here? The quantum field is real. The parallel branches are real. The physics is real. All of that is true. But the deepest application of it is not cosmological. It is personal. It is the willingness to stop living at the surface of yourself, to stop accepting the thin outer layer of your conditioned self-concept as the whole of what you are, to peel back the surface understanding of who you are and look at what's underneath. Because underneath the surface version of you, the version that was shaped by what other people needed you to be, by what circumstances required you to become, by the quantum events that happened to go the way they did. Underneath all of that is the full quantum field of your being. The awareness that is not limited to any single branch. The depth that has never been captured by any single expression of your life. That depth is not somewhere else. It is here. It is now. It is the layer beneath everything you've ever experienced, and it has been waiting with infinite patience for your awareness to look beneath the surface and find it. You've always sensed there was more beneath the surface. You were right. Something in you has always known the surface isn't the whole truth, and now you have a framework for what that knowing was pointing at. A framework built from the most rigorous mathematics ever applied to the nature of reality, and from the most ancient maps of hidden territory ever drawn by human consciousness. A framework that honors both the physics and the wisdom, both the precision and the mystery, both the structure and the depth. What has been revealed cannot be rehidden. You are no longer a surface dweller. You see the depth now, and from the depth, everything looks different. Not because the surface has changed, but because you know what's beneath it. You know that the solid, fixed, singular reality you were taught to accept is the thinnest possible layer of what actually exists. You know that beneath it is a quantum field of infinite possibility that your nervous system is already in contact with. You know that your parallel self is not a fantasy, but a structural feature of the reality you inhabit. You know that your anti-self is not your enemy, but your quantum complement, the precise opposite that defines the full scope of what you are. And you know, perhaps more importantly than any of the physics or the ancient wisdom, that you are not separate from the field. You are the field, locally expressed, temporarily individuated, but not fundamentally separate. Never fundamentally separate. The awareness that is present in all the parallel branches simultaneously is not something you need to reach. It is what you are. It has always been what you are. The veil was never between you and something else. It was between you and the recognition of what you already are. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. If this transmission is still moving through you, and it will keep moving, in the quiet hours, in the space before sleep, when the surface noise drops and the deeper layers are most accessible, return to it then. Watch it again from the depth you've just reached, and notice how much more becomes visible the second time through. And if you know someone who carries that signal, that below audible range vibration in the walls of their current life, send this to them. When you give someone access to a layer they could sense but couldn't reach alone, the membrane thins for both of you. That is not a metaphor. That is how quantum coherence between two consciousness fields actually works. I want to know what layer you reached in this transmission. What was the moment when something shifted in your nervous system? What was the hidden layer that, once seen, made it impossible to look at yourself the same way again? Drop it in the comments. Not because sharing it will make it more real for you, it is already real, but because your recognition may be the exact thing that another person needs to see in order to lift their own veil. Your depth is not just for you, it is a light that, when expressed, illuminates the depth in others. If this transmission reached you, if it took you somewhere beneath the surface of what you thought you knew, then let it reach someone else. Share it with one person who you know is ready to look beneath the surface, who has that signal in their life, that below audible range vibration in the walls of their current reality, and hasn't yet had a framework for what it is. You lifting the veil for yourself is one thing. You lifting it for someone else is something else entirely. And if you want to keep going deeper, if you want to continue the work of peeling back the layers of reality and discovering what has always been hidden beneath everything, then stay with us. Subscribe, because every transmission we produce is another layer lifted, another veil made transparent, another hidden layer of reality brought into the light of awareness. If what we've excavated here has opened something in you and you want the complete map, all 5 layers charted from the consensus surface down to the original frequency, with the practices that make each depth stable rather than fleeting, I put the full excavation into Beneath the Veil, a quantum map of reality's hidden layers. This video touches the territory. The book is the cartography, with every layer named, every threshold crossed, and a practice at each depth designed to make the recognition permanent. You'll find it in the description below. The quantum field is inexhaustible. The depth has no bottom, and we have only just begun to dig. The veil is thinner than you think, and now you can see through it. The next layer to explore is already waiting for you. The quantum field has been sending you signs, and most people miss them entirely because they don't know what they're actually looking at. The transmission called warning, you will not get another sign from the quantum field. After this, we'll show you exactly how the field communicates, why those signals stop when you ignore them, and what becomes possible the moment you finally learn to read them.